I don't care what anybody says. You're never going to stop learning. So any of these guys that pat themselves on the back, that know everything, they're just foolish because it's always changing.
You want to feel the difference. And when that rod tip is too stiff, that very subtle, different pull is indiscernible from those little taps.
People will go up, they don't see bass popping, they make a couple casts, they leave. But they don't take the time to try and figure out what's going on under the surface.
We'll sit there, do 5 of those drifts and not catch one fish and just go. They'll just keep going to the next spot. Right. Not me, I'm staying there.
You have that moment with all sorts of species of fish where you realize you are not the one that's got the upper hand in the fight, and I realized that very quickly. That fish, it took off, it dug my rod tip right into the water.
Hello and welcome to the Salt Strong live stream and podcast. My name is Rich Natoli. I am the regular host of this show. And this week we're doing something a little bit different. We've been focusing a lot on the Mid-Atlantic and Northeast, and we're going to branch out a little bit tonight. The first thing that you'll notice is that regular co-host Ed is off tonight. He demanded some holiday time. He's got his fishing to do. So he's out tonight, but I am in tonight, and I am being joined, and I'm going to bring him on stream right now, by 3 other Salt Strong coaches. So if we go around the horn, we have Pat Ogletree, Wyatt Parcel, and we got Matt in the Yak with 8 rods in the back. I love that. Guys, welcome. It's great to have you guys on here. This is going to be a fun one, I think. And for everyone watching, this is your chance to ask any questions you have about fishing. I know there will be others in the chat that aren't about fishing, but ask any questions that you have about fishing to one of the Salt Strong coaches, and we'll do our best to give you the best answers that we can. But as we get started, I know that there are a lot of Salt Strong insiders that are going to be watching. So they are familiar with all of us, but they're not necessarily, but everybody else is not necessarily going to be familiar with everyone. So why don't we go around the horn real quick and everyone just kind of give, where do you typically fish? What are the species that you're targeting, so that people know exactly what we have here in the stream tonight for them as far as resources. And Pat, let's start with you.
Hey, how's it going, everybody? My name is Pat Ogletree, and like Rich said, I'm one of the fishing coaches here at Salt Strong, and I've got kind of a unique position. I'm not fixed in a normal place. I actually live in an RV, and I travel the country, and I go anywhere from, I've been in Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, all the way up to Virginia, and all points in between. And basically what I do is I'll fish an area, I'll get a report on how that area is doing, and then I'll put it in the community and make fishing tips based off of what is fishing in that area. And my species that I really like, I'm a redfish addict. I actually love catching redfish everywhere, but trout, flounder, snook down in Florida, juvenile tarpon, that's my wheelhouse. Those are the species that I really like to go after. So that's it in a nutshell.
That's awesome. All right, so we've got the roaming, wandering nomad fisherman in Pat, and then Wyatt, you're on mute, but if you want to unmute and give a little bit about your region and expertise.
Yeah, so currently I am in Texas. When I started with Salt Strong, I was in North Carolina, and I've fished all over, but currently am living and presiding in Texas and Corpus Christi. Have access to some of the best trout fishing, I think, in the country. But that is my region. I'm familiar with all types of fishing, all regions. I travel a lot to fish. I just really chase wherever the best bite is. But currently I'm playing cowboy in Texas.
That's awesome. Awesome. And then we got Matt in the Yak.
Yeah, I'm Matt. I am the fishing coach for the Panhandle Big Bend area. I, like Pat, do a lot of nomad traveling, but mine's usually limited to about 4 hours east or about 4 hours west of me. So, but I will take the kayak on a stroll and go fish pretty much anywhere along the Emerald Coast, Forgotten Coast, Nature Coast, all of that. It's just a beautiful area, and I'm blessed to be able to fish it and kind of represent it in such a great way.
That's awesome. So we've got the entire South Virginia and all the way down the coast, all the way through the Gulf and down to the border of Mexico. Wyatt, I won't ask you if you've ever crossed the border, because I know that there are some really good spots just across the border. And then for those that are not familiar with me, my name is Rich Natoli. I am the coach for the Mid-Atlantic and Northeast. So I am typically going to be fishing really anywhere from Virginia on up. And I really go as far as New York, Connecticut area right now, but I am going to be expanding into Rhode Island and further north this year. So, different fish. So Pat, you're talking about redfish. We don't see redfish up here, but in a couple of social media posts every season in the New Jersey, New York areas. So I'm going to be targeting mainly fluke, which is what we call flounder up here. And striped bass are the big ones. Then we have sheepshead and tog, which are really big. So that's really what I'm covering. So everybody that's watching, you can see we've got some wide experience, wide range of regions that we can cover. And we'll just say hi to the people in the chat before we get into the first question. James Flynn's in there. I Feel Fishy. Carl Ward. Participation Trophy Fishing, which is still the best name ever. Jack West. John Kern, good to see you in there. I think John, I saw today, got a trophy buck. I think it was out in Iowa. So congratulations, John. Man, I wish these glasses were a little bit. Jack's Beach Fishing, Fish Gum, Kyler Outdoors, how you doing? Bill McFutter. Man, I can't read these. Daniel, what is that? Oh, Dan the Airboatman. Okay. And there's probably some other ones that I've just kind of skipped through. So welcome everybody. As we go through this, ask the questions in the chat, and we're going to do our best to answer as many of them as we can in the next hour. If you're watching on a replay, put the questions in the comments or go to the saltstrong.com page. Take a look at the fishing tips. You'll see this episode up there, and ask questions in that little write up there, in that blog write up. That's probably the best place to do it. And also for the podcast, you can do that as well when this comes out in a couple of weeks. So, man, talk amongst yourselves, ask the questions, and let's have some fun. And we're going to go through here, and let me just see if I can find the first question here. Let's see. The first question that we have. Oh, first, they were making fun of me for being late. For the record, we were only 20 seconds late on this episode, but I apologize. I should have started it sooner. And actually, as I go sorting through these, I actually had a couple of questions I wanted to start with. Let's just start with this one and kind of go around the horn real quick, because we do have the different regions here. So it's now mid to late November. What is the high level description of the changes or the transitions that you're seeing in your areas right now? The behavior changes, the location or spot changes. What are you looking for in your regions right now that are a little bit different than they were, let's say, in October and September? And let's start, Wyatt, with you and talk about Texas.
Right. So we have had our first couple serious cold fronts, and fish recently were really locked into those heavy spawns. You had redfish at the inlets, huge schools of them that were getting caught by all the guys on the jetty, the boats that were there fishing mullet on the bottom. I mean, it was blitzes and blitzes of redfish out there. In the bays, you had a lot of flounder that were migrating out. There's still a little bit of that going on, not as heavy, and the trout were kind of starting to show up. As soon as those cold fronts hit, those blitzes at the jetties kind of started to slow down. The flounder were not running as much, and those trout have become a little bit more prevalent. So as it gets really cold in the wintertime here in Texas, what we see a lot of is the trophy trout anglers start to come out. These big spawning trout that were really heavy into getting a bunch of eggs together for that fall spawn. Now they're trying to recoup some of those calories that they expended during spawning. So this is when a lot of the guys start breaking out the corkies, start breaking out some of those big bait fish presentations, and getting up kind of into those areas along some of the really big shorelines. So in Texas, you get these giant bay systems. It's actually the Laguna Madre is one of the longest running bay systems in the world, if not the longest. So you end up with these shorelines that stretch for miles and miles and miles. And what'll happen is you need to really just locate those areas where fish would have been during those spawning periods. So areas where there's just lots of structure, congregations of bait, and look for those zones that they would have taken cover in as soon as those fronts hit. Deep holes, northern protected shorelines, areas of that nature. And as soon as these fronts pass, we're going to have some of the most phenomenal trout fishing I think that we've seen in a couple of years, because this has just been like 2-3 fronts back to back, and those trout and even the redfish as well, they're going to slide up as soon as those first couple of days of warmth come, and they're going to get up real shallow. They're going to feed really heavily because they've just not been able to get out and hunt fish. So I think the biggest key right now is looking at where fish would have been feeding before those fronts hit, where they took cover during the fronts, and then where they're going to return to as soon as some of those warmer temperatures come back. So start looking around some of those holes, start looking around some of those northern protected shorelines, and be ready for some of those big fish that expended a lot during the spawn to come up and feed really heavy. I think the next couple of weeks, we're going to see some very serious fish caught here in Texas once it starts to warm back up a little bit, once these fronts pass.
Yeah, Pat and I were talking about that before we started. It's the big fish time in Texas right now.
Yes.
That's some great information. Matt, you want to jump in and talk a little bit about the Panhandle and the surrounding area?
Yeah, sure. So just to kind of piggyback on what Wyatt said to start with, October was just a lot of redfish. The hunt for red October was going on. Everybody's chasing bull redfish and schooling redfish on the flats. I was doing a lot of that, just miles and miles of just covering ground to find fish, but we're out of that now. Thankfully, we don't have to go so far to find fish now anyway. We can find fish that are going to be stacked up in these more predictable zones. They're going to be at, deeper holes around these feeder creeks, and they're going to be in areas that are warming up faster. In my area, we got a lot of oyster bars, a lot of oyster bottom, and a lot of marshy area. So that's where these fish start moving into now. They're definitely moving into these areas. They're not really on the flats anymore, now that you see I'm wearing my comfy editing flannel. So just like Wyatt, so it's definitely, we got our cold fronts coming on here, so these fish are definitely pushing into areas where they're going to be warmer and places that are going to warm up faster. That's what we're finding here for sure.
Awesome. Pat? And Pat, you can talk about you're on mute, but you can talk about any region that you feel that you would like to talk about for this, since you cover so many.
Well, actually, I'm right here in the east central coast of Florida, so I'll talk about what I'm seeing here. And what I've got is much like Matt. Florida is the last place in the country that really sees a drop in the temperature, and it just so happens we got our first real cold fronts just here recently. Happens in the fall time is, just like Matt's situation, where we're going to see these fish that they're going to school up, but these schools are going to be kind of spread out all over the place. But right now, what they're doing is we're finally seeing that transition where we're catching them right at the creek mouths because they're starting to push back. A lot of the areas we fish here in Florida is really shallow, especially on the East Coast. Deep water to us is 8 feet. That's really deep. Normally the water that we're fishing is, anywhere from 1.5 feet to 3 foot. So whenever this cold water really comes in, the fish will push deeper, but the best place to find these deeper areas is going to be in your bends of your creeks. So they're staging at the mouths of these creeks, and they're waiting for those cold fronts to come in. So the signal of those lower angles on as more frequent cold fronts is going to get these fish really tight together. So like Matt said, they're going to be easier to find. You're not going to have to travel as much. Matter of fact, there's going to be days come, say, December and January, where you can go to one bend and creek mouth and catch as many fish literally as you want in a day, and just a few hours time. This actually is one of my favorite times of the year to fish. I used to not like fishing in the wintertime. One, because I'm a Floridian, I don't like cold weather, and I know that's relative. I know you guys up north are completely different than our idea of cold weather. But now, realizing that these fish are more concentrated than they are, say, in the summertime, it's actually an easier time to fish. It's just on those days when the cold fronts are just hitting you and you get that drop in that water temperature, you just change your presentation and you go deep, you go slow. A couple days after that front comes through, you get those bluebird skies. You're looking for wind protection, you're looking for shallow flats. You're not fishing sandy bottoms anymore, you're fishing muddy bottoms, and you're slowing your presentations down. And those are just one of those, you can get really, really banner days this time of year, and I'm actually excited for it.
That's awesome. And I think it is very, I'll just say it, it's cute when you guys talk about cold weather. We were down to 27 last night, and man, the fish went off today. Now, I unfortunately was not out there fishing, but I sure get the texts and the messages from all my buddies that were. We're talking limits on striped bass and tog in the New Jersey, New York areas, and actually down into Maryland, they're starting to pick up a lot of tog right now. Still waiting for the biomass of the striped bass. So the big thing for us in the Mid-Atlantic, and I'm talking coastal Mid-Atlantic all the way up through the Northeast, is we do have the shutting down of a lot of seasons. So, you can still catch flounder in certain areas. Like if you're in Delaware, it's still open. You can still catch them, but it's not really the best time to go for them. But it's closed pretty much everywhere else. So it's really a striped bass fishery and tog or blackfish right now. And those are the switches that you need to make. And the interesting thing that you have right now, though, is for striped bass, you have the resident populations that you can target, which is one tactic. And then there's the migration. If you want to target the migration, which is what most people try to do, the larger fish, they're out front, they're outside of the inlets, coming down the beaches within that 3 nautical mile limit that we have to fish. You're looking for the big schools, and you're talking, acres or miles of bunker, peanut bunker to adult bunker. And as I was telling Pat earlier, I was out last week on a charter on the Fishmonger. I went with Frank Mahalik, who people have, if you've seen this stream before, you've recognized Frank as a just amazing tog fisherman. And we went out for tog and ran into striped bass, and it turned into well over 300 fish caught within a couple of hours on the deck with 10 guys. So that's the type of thing that you can get. However, I think it was 2 days after that, they couldn't find any striped bass, but they were all on the tog. I mean, they were nailing the beautiful blackfish, but the striped bass were gone. So you have both conditions right now. So it's really, you got to choose. Do you want the resident striped bass in the backwaters? Do you want the migration striped bass, or are you going to look for the tog or the blackfish before they start closing in different states? So that's what we're looking at here. So very different experiences across, different experience up here than down there. Down there, you guys are looking for the trophy fish right now. And the trophies that we're looking for are those striped bass and the tog. But with that, let's jump into the first question that we have, and I'll put it on screen here. This is from Jack's Beach Fishing, going fishing tomorrow in Jacksonville for Sheepshead. Any tips? Now, I know, Wyatt, you're not the biggest of Sheepshead fishermen. I'm not sure. Pat and Matt, are you guys interested in Sheepshead fishing? You have anything you want to share about the Jacksonville area?
Actually, Matt is the one to answer this question because he's got a report that just hit a couple hours ago. So I'll let him take this one.
I didn't want to say that because I didn't realize it hit. Okay. Go ahead.
That's true. So yes, I was actually in Jacksonville just a few weeks ago, actually. And I made a trip to the jetties with one of our other fishing coaches, Richard Thomas, who is in Savannah. He and I made a trip down south to Jacksonville, and we went sheepshead fishing. And we were at the jetties, and we were fishing with live fiddlers. That's how we were able to get on them. And we went through a pretty good number, sorting through plenty of blennies, but we had a pretty good day. We threw fish back, and we came home with enough for us to eat. But we were finding that those fish were holding pretty tight to the structure. And we did have to wait for that tide to get to that right level. That's really what we found. We were out there 6 hours, and we probably had only about maybe 2.5 hours of consistent sheephead action because they preferred that specific part of that tide cycle where that water was just coming across the rocks at just the right way. So it can often be about positioning on the right side of the rocks as well. You definitely want to be if you're on the jetties, that is, you want to be positioned on the right side of the rocks according to the tide. Targeting an outgoing tide is a great way to do it for sure. But make sure you're on the outside of those rocks, and definitely wait until that tide gets enough below the top of those rocks to where you can see where you're targeting, because those rocks come out a pretty good ways. We came to find out after some hang-ups of catching into Florida there for a little while. I think we caught I caught more Florida than I caught sheephead for about the first 2 hours, but it's all right. Once I figured out where, I could get that, once the water level dropped and I was able to see how far out those rocks actually came out, then I was able to figure out where they were holding at. And, so when you're doing that kind of fishing, definitely be prepared for those hangups, just like I was talking about. Be prepared for breakoffs and be prepared for the unknown. I hooked into a sheep's head that you see in that report. I hooked into a sheep's head and he's coming up to the surface and I get sharked by, 6, 7 foot black tip. So, there's no telling what could happen right there at the jetties. We caught a couple redfish as well. So, your bycatch could be fun, could be exciting, could be interesting, but it could be plenty of blennies too.
Yeah, the only tip that I'll add into that is when you're fishing on those jetties and those rocks, tie a long leader on. So if you're going to tie that FG up top, I personally will go with something very long. Now, if it's real heavy jetties, I might tie one as long as 20 feet and I'll just reel that thing right onto the reel. And that's because I just don't feel like retying, especially, I don't know what it's going to be like in Jacksonville, but the fall and winter winds up here, some of the best days to go fishing are 30 miles per hour. I don't want to be tying an FG in 30 miles per hour. So I can just kind of pare it down and hope that it breaks off down at the jig. So that I'll just give that tip. It'll save you a lot of time and aggravation if you just have to do a quick loop knot rather than retie the whole thing and start stripping leader off the container or out of the container or off the rolls or spool. Anyone else have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I'll add something. Just we talk about jetties and we talk about bridges when it comes to sheepshead, but don't overlook the more obscure type of structure like your channel markers, your power poles that they've got some of the St. Johns River up there in Jacksonville if that's where you're going to be fishing. But the older structure that's got the most amount of barnacles is going to be what typically is going to hold the bigger sheepshead and more of them. So look for the oldest piece of structure. That's my tip.
And
yeah,
even now, I do believe that you can even find now that it's getting a little bit colder, some of those sheepshead are even pushing up into the St. Johns River where those barnacles are stacked up on a lot of that structure that's along those seawalls and stuff. So those are also great places to look. And definitely something I do want to recommend is, something that overlooked as well, even though if you go to Target, these heavy type of structure places like the jetties or things like this for sheephead, it's easy to overthink it and want to over gear because you're going to heavy structure, you want to carry heavy rods or heavy gear, but when you're fishing for sheepshead, those bites can be super light and super fast, so you want to be using something that can feel those really light bites, those really light taps, so that you can get that really fast hook set and get control of that fish fast, and pull them away from that structure. You need to have a rod that's got good backbone, but a nice tip on it, nice sensitive tip, so that you can feel those bites.
Excellent point. Yeah, up here we say a lot of people say set on the movement, not necessarily the feel. So you better watch your line because those sheepshead they'll take it off and you won't even know that you had something. And it often happens on the drop. So watch that drop and know the difference when you lift it, if there's a crab on there or not. You'll feel the difference. You'll get to know it real quick in the day, but start off thinking about that and it'll help you. So we've got another question coming. This is participation trophy fishing, April, South Carolina, redfish. This is a participation trophy trying to get in ahead of the game. Wyatt, this might be a good one for you. Where do you find them in the low country and how are you catching them in April?
So April is an interesting time in the Carolinas. It's known as the time you go target flood tides. Spring flood tides are a huge thing in the Carolinas. When I think of flood tide fishing, I think of it happening in South Carolina because there's so many open flats where it's just this really tall grass and you get these fish that are getting up in like a foot of water and they're surrounded by these reeds. It's a very technical type of fishing. You need a kayak that can either get up on those marshes or you need a poling skiff and you need to get in there and just be very observant. And I've been able to get in there and do some really fun fishing. Their tails are, wagging really heavy. That's where you see those really classic images of of the redfish tailing in the grass. It's happening during spring. So if you're going to be in the low country in April, I can say that finding those flooded marshes, like really far back, if you look on satellite maps, you'll see these winding creek systems that go back and dead end somewhere in a marsh. And where those creeks dead end, that's where those fish end up, because the tide, they're going to, wherever that tide kind of finishes out as it's rising, you end up with these king tides in spring. And these are areas that fish are never able to access outside of that spring flood tide. They're going to get up as far as they can. So the big key for finding a good area for those flood tide zones is if you've got a creek system that splits off 20 different ways, that's 20 different dead end zones you got to kind of look at. But if you can find a really big creek system that doesn't have as many split offs and dead ends in one zone, you're going to have more redfish in that end zone area. So I'd say that's probably one of the best places to look. If you don't feel like going and trying to get up in the reeds, or you don't have the ability to do so, maybe your craft can't do it, you're in, a regular skiff like I would be, one of the best things you can do is go find one of those big open flats that has a lot of oyster bars on it. Just big mud flat with those large bars, and go there on like an outgoing tide and try to throw topwater around some of those bars, because those redfish at high tides, they're on top of them. Sometimes they're dialed in on shrimp and digging on the bar itself. But on outgoing tides, they're usually staged up behind those bars, waiting on bait fish or small shrimp to kind of get brought around them. And if you throw topwater near those oyster bars, some of my best days for topwater redfish are in spring around those oyster bars in the marshes. They're going to clobber some of those smaller, like super spooks, the moonwalkers. I wouldn't be throwing really big topwaters in spring, but I think you're either going to go flood tide fishing for them, or on outgoing low tides, get near some of those oyster bars on the open mud flats and toss some of those smaller topwaters.
That's great information right there. And I think that he'll figure a way to get up into the reeds if I know him. Now, I have one thing I want to throw up here before the next question. I think it's this is for you and me, Pat. From Joe Simons, get Pat and Rich some flannel. So this is while we're answering these, Joe brings up a good point, or a good question. Any of you guys fishing over Thanksgiving? If so, what are you targeting? That's a good side conversation for the chat. So I wanted to throw that in there. Some people won't have interest in April, South Carolina fishing. So talk in the chat. And as we move through the different questions, that's a good topic to go through. The next question that we have, let me get that up here. Dan, the airboatman, what's the best surf fishing time? High tide, low tide, rising, or falling? I'll take the first swing at this as a quick one. And I'm going to say, really, for me, it's not necessarily the tide. And it's not necessarily whether it's rising or falling. It's how much it's moving and what it's doing to the structure that I'm fishing on the beach in the surf. So I personally, when I'm surf fishing, and full disclosure, I don't do it a lot. But when I'm fishing the structure on the beach, I'm looking for how it's interacting. Now, where I am on fishing, let's say in New Jersey, I'm looking straight out towards the east or east-ish, depending on which direction the coastline is. The incoming tide is going to be moving from my right to the left, and the outgoing is going to be going from the left to the right. So I'm going to be trying to set up on the appropriate side of whatever structure I'm fishing at that time, especially if it's a jetty or if it's a seawall or something like that. If there's a big cut, I'm going to be looking, or a sandbar, I'm going to be looking at the different directions of where the bait's going to get pushed. So for me, it's not necessarily high or low tide. It doesn't typically matter to me unless I'm going to be getting access to different structure as the tide rises and falls. So if it's going out, and I know that now I'm going to be able to get over that second sandbar that has a beautiful cut that I can now reach, that becomes a great time for me to go fishing around the low tide time. But what I typically find is it's hard to know what you can't see. And so it's really easy to see the structure that's there at low tide and then fish it at high tide. You'll be able to see all the cuts, all the little riffles, everything that's now covered up by the water later. So I'm going to say my vote is there is no best tide in general. It all depends on how that current and how that wave action is going to be working against the structure that you're actually fishing at that time. Anyone else want to jump in with your thoughts?
Yeah, I'll take a swing at this, like, because I actually went down and filmed our beach fishing mastery course that we've got available at Salt Strong with Bama Beach Bum, who y'all might know. He's got a very popular YouTube channel, and I was kind of surprised to learn. I thought he would have a dead answer as well, like, no, this is the best tide. It really just depends on your target species. So if we take like some of the really popular species out there, you got whiting, you've got red drum, you've got pompano, Spanish mackerel, all these species. It really is going to depend on the behaviors of that species and where you're fishing, that each tide is going to open up opportunities. In general, it seemed like there were more opportunities for some of the grazer species at higher tides, like pompano and whiting. Higher rising tides are going to put those fish a little bit closer to the beach and allow you to reach them as they're kind of running up and down. Those sandbars, again, it's dependent on the type of structure you're fishing, guts, sandbars, things like that. Sometimes you can find more concentrated areas of fish on lower tides. Those pompano, if you've got like a bowl where there's two sandbars that are like right next to each other, and then there's a cut between them, those pompano will come around the sandbar, slide in, take a really close look near the surf where it's a little bit deeper, and then they'll slide back out. So if you've got a presentation in this bowl, you're going to catch pompano like crazy. So it's, again, where you're fishing, what the opportunity is. For something like redfish, for example, if you're staged outside of a pass or an inlet, those fish that sit in the pass on outgoing tides, they'll travel out to the surf. So if you're on like that point of that pass, when we did all of the bull redfish footage for that course, every single bull red we caught, I think we got like 3, we got it on an outgoing tide outside of a pass or inlet. So it depends on your target species and the type of structure that you're fishing. It seemed like there were more opportunities to just catch anything if you're putting a line out there with, a bit of shrimp on it, like a high rising tide. But if you kind of look through that course, you'll realize all the species really have tides and structure that they will relate to more closely, again, on a very specific set of conditions, like I mentioned in a couple of those different situations.
Good information. All right, let's go on to the next one. I thought this is a great question from Kyler Outdoors. Can you go over air pressure and its effect on snook and reds?
Anybody want to take a swing at it?
I could take a swing at it. I don't typically fish for reds and I've never fished for snook. Again, I'm a mid-Atlantic Northeast guy. I do fish down to North Carolina. Love fishing for reds. My swing at it is this. I do believe that the air pressure does have a significant impact on fish. And, that's where you get the calm before the storm, is really when you want to go out fishing, when you have the changing water pressure or the air pressure, which then changes the water pressure on the fish that are underneath it. So there are certain times, generally speaking, when you have the pressure going really low, really fast, that can have a negative impact on the fish and vice versa. But usually as they start those swings to either higher or lower pressure, you get a really active bite going on. Think about it, before a storm, it just makes sense that a fish is going to want to feed before everything gets chewed up and really turbulent. They're going to want to feed when it's easiest. Again, they need to treat every calorie as precious. They're not like us. They can't just run out to a Wawa or a Stop and Go or whatever and just grab a candy bar and get their calories. They're eating for survival 100% of the time. So they don't want to waste their calories fighting huge storms, nor'easters, hurricanes, tropical storms. They want to get their food when it's easiest. Air pressure is going to be one of those indicators to them that they better start feeding now because something is changing, weather is coming. So the calm before the storm is definitely a good thing. And that's generally what I'm looking for. And full disclosure, I don't not go fishing because of air pressures, right? They could be sustained high for 3 weeks. If I have Thursday off, I'm going fishing on Thursday. I don't care. But if there is a chance for me to adjust my schedule, because I know it's a different case for you guys down in Florida, but up here, when the hurricane's coming, all the surf fishermen are grabbing their gear and they're watching that barometer and they're getting out there and they're fishing just ahead of that storm. And then the couple days after, as the pressures are changing. So that's my take on it. Does anyone have anything different or anything they want to add to that?
I pay attention
Yeah,
to it.
I'm kind of along the same lines as you. As far as I don't dictate whether I fish on certain days and not certain days, but I will use that as an indicator on how I fish. So when you have an approaching storm, that typically does trigger a bite. As long as it's not a major storm, it'll trigger a bite. But as soon as that storm is there, and then maybe just after it, there might be a little bit of a bite. But say the day after storm, and a lot of times when you get that different change that's going the opposite direction, it kind of throws the fish off a little bit. So I like maybe a couple of days after a storm. But with that being said, a really, really high pressure day, bluebird skies, those are some of the toughest days to fish. But again, that doesn't mean I'm not going to go out there and try it. Matter of fact, Matt and I were fishing a topwater tournament, and we were fishing in these bluebird skies in these conditions that we shouldn't have been catching any fish. And I caught the biggest trout of my life in days. So you never know. What I do is just use the barometric pressure as a guide, and just tailor my fishing to that. But even more of a clue than that is going to be the feeding activity once you get out on the water. So I get out there, I'm just looking for feeding activity. If I don't see feeding activity, then I'm just using that as a guide to slow down and gear down and use smaller baits and use that type of presentation. But again, it's not a end all be whether I go fishing or not.
Agreed. Wyatt?
Yeah, I was going to say I pay attention to it pretty heavily for trout. Like I was talking about in the kind of overview for Texas, it's a pressure thing when I talk about these cold fronts. When I say fronts, period, that's the arrival of colder weather, and it's that lower pressure or higher pressure, sustained cold weather over a long time. That's high pressure. Sustained hot weather over a long time. That's high pressure. When you get that change, that allows that new system to move in. That's that low pressure. And that signals to fish that there's something new coming. So coming out of one of those fronts, you're going to have low pressure, and it's going to allow for some warmer, warmer weather to move in, and then it's going to turn into high pressure. But that low, it indicates to fish maybe something's coming. They don't have weathermen like you and I do. It's the barometer, and looking at pressure is just another way to evaluate what's changing and the severity of that change. So the reason I look at it for big trout, those big trout, they only consume high calorie meals, and they don't consume them often. So if they can feel that the pressure is changing, they know they need to feed because they don't know when their next meal is going to be. For fish that feed more frequently, I don't find it to be as big of a deal. I don't pay attention to it for redfish. I don't fish for snook very often, so it's not a big deal. For big trout, those sow trout for me, that is my opportunity to know that big fish will be up in the shallows within reach of, where I can present to them. And I'm going to have a higher chance of success going after those fish. So I can look at the weather and see that, we've had a couple of days of very mild weather, and see that there's big storms coming. And it's going to tell me the exact same thing as me looking at a barometer and seeing that it's been stable, and then there's a big drop. So it's whatever kind of system you want to look at that tells you that that kind of change is occurring, whether you look at a barometer or you pay attention to the weatherman, that is what I would do. Just be aware of what's been happening and what's about to happen, because the barometer and that change in air pressure is how fish get that information. But you can do it through multiple different channels.
Agreed. All right, next question for you, quote unquote, down south people. Do people target flounder down south on the fly rod? From I Feel Fishy.
Yes, they do. You can see them laying there. It's like when you go gigging for them. It's like it's a common thing here. You can see them, so you can throw a little Clouser minnow on them and just dance it around their face, and they'll take it. But it's no different than just sight fishing for them if you're pulling through the marsh. They're not very easy to see, but it's not a common thing to do, I would say.
No, I have caught them on the fly up in New Jersey, and it's a whole different thing because, deep water, you were saying deep water is 8 feet. I think Pat had mentioned, deep water here is maybe 60. So, we're fishing for flounder in 60 feet of water. You're not using a fly, but there are times where you can catch them up on the flats and right along the edges of the channels in the real shallow, or actually a great spot to do it is when the tide is out next to jetties, because they'll sit right next to the jetties and they won't move even though it's low tide, and you can pick them up there sometimes. But Yeah, so they are caught down south on the fly rod. This next one is a good one. ASCIP 7. So they're thinking that we don't talk about Louisiana, but we do. And going to Hopedale. What are your insights on that area? And I think this is probably Matt. You might be able to have some insight into this one. Wyatt, definitely, for Louisiana. What are you looking at for this upcoming week in that area as far as trends?
So I would say that in Louisiana, you're dealing with marsh systems, and a lot of these fish, they were up near the entrances to a lot of these marshes, kind of closer to the ocean near fall. I know that the bull red run that occurs over there, that happens on the outside of those major marshes that are connected to the ocean. But as you've started to get some of this cooler weather, those fish are going to start pushing into the marshes, and you need to find those big open lakes that those fish funneled into near the ocean entrances, and find the northern shorelines on those big open lakes, because you have a lot of those kind of mazy marshes where you can catch fish and get a lot of nice trout in the deeper cut areas. But if I was going to go fish in the marshes of Louisiana this upcoming weekend, I would try to target redfish. The change for trout is going to be a little tough. I would think in that type of environment, you'd need a couple more cold fronts to come through. And I think you guys have a little bit different weather than we've been experiencing from what I've seen on the radar. I think your best bet as we get, some heavy north winds coming in, to look at those big lakes, because it's just going to push all those fish that are out in the open zones into protected areas. So if you've got a big open area like this, north winds coming down, you just need to go look for those shorelines that are up over here, because those redfish are going to tuck up tight to that grass. If you got little feeder creeks that are coming through, they're going to be staged on both sides of those points. But I wouldn't get too far up in those marshes. I'd stick closer to the ones that are a little bit further down, close to the Gulf, because those fish are just starting to come back in. These fronts are brand new to them. So that would be my advice. Pat, I know you've spent a bunch of time up in Louisiana as well. Well, I say up, for you would be over.
Yeah, I've actually fished Hopedale before, and that is amazing fishery. If you've never had a chance to fish that area, Hopedale, Shell Beach, that whole area is great. But right now, you pretty much hit the nail on the head. What's happening is during the summertime, those trout are going to be on the outer edges of the marshes. They're going to be basically out in the Gulf of Mexico, and as those fronts come in, they're going to move in through the marshes, through those channels. So Hopedale is one of those lagoons where they're going to start stacking up in there, and it should be any time now. Now, the way that I would fish for those is I'm looking for birds, because that is a big thing in Louisiana. Is the trout and the redfish are going to push those shrimp up to the surface. The birds are going to come down and feed off of them, and it's going to be one of those fast and furious types of fisheries where this is not a time for live bait. It's not a wait and bait kind of thing. You want to throw artificials, get in that frenzy, and then once those birds go away and the feeding frenzy kind of dies down, you can just move around and try to find that same school again. So Hopedale gets a ring of grass that's around the outside edges. So the trout are going to be on the outside, the deeper edges of that ring of grass. And your redfish and flounder, they're pretty much residential fish in that area. They're going to be all the way up against that grass, and any type of, combination of, if you get oysters near that grass, that's where your redfish are going to be. And really the best time to target them, I like them after a cold front, a couple days after a cold front, when we get that warming trend, that sun gets high up in the sky and you get some wind protection on that north side. That's a great time to target those. But as far as trout goes, that's going to be open water and not be looking for birds.
Wow, that's some great information. I wish I had more to add, except I've been enjoying the bull red pictures from Louisiana the past week or so. So yeah, get on them, get out there. This is an interesting question for the kayak fishermen, and we're all current, former kayak fishermen here. Novice kayak tournament angler here. Consistently can find the lower to mid slot reds, but those upper slot reds continue to elude me. Any help that we can give there? Where are they?
That is the question.
Most popular
That is
question.
the question. Yeah. Where are those bigger redfish? Well, that's a loaded question, my man. That's for me anyway. Where I fish personally, that can be heavily influenced by the season. So, knowing redfish behavior and where those fish are going to be, you know, according to what they do and what season, that's a big part of it too. And you'll find sometimes when these fish do tend to school up, they'll school up according to size, or and sometimes of the year you get those lone rangers that are just massive missiles cruising the flats, eating whatever they're coming across, and they don't run in packs. They run by themselves. But so it's a little bit different. Some and like I said, and a lot of it is according to the season. In October, you can find schooling redfish cruising the flats. If you just keep moving long enough, you'll see them. You'll see them. You just got to keep moving until you find them. But once you do, and often you'll find that they're schooled up according to size. So, say in that period, if you're finding a school that's all mid slot, keep moving because there's another school that's going to be a little bit bigger. And I promise you, there's a school out there somewhere that's over slot because that's happened before too. I've been in tournaments where guys have come back and they couldn't have a single slot fish to present, and that's because all they could get into was over slot redfish, because that's what they were finding. That's the schools that they were grouped up on. So, a lot of catching the upper slots. That's the nuances. That's where the small things come in, man. It's where those very minute details are really important. It's your presentation. It's all the way down to scent. Scent. I talk about that a lot in my videos. Scent is super important, especially when you're targeting those bigger fish because bigger fish are smart, man. They're not big by happenstance. They're big because they've been smart and they've seen a lot of it. They've seen it all. So, if you're going to trick a big fish into biting, you gotta be a little bit smarter than everything else that's come across their face. So that's one of the reasons I use Dr. Juice, the exclusive that we have, the Inshore Slam scent. You see me putting it on almost all of my baits and almost all of my videos, and that's not for aesthetic purposes. That's because it catches fish and big fish. And I have footage where I've used that stuff or just scent, period, to catch big fish. And that always is a big part for me. I feel like, scent factor is huge.
Yeah, I think the one thing that you said at the beginning is critical. The most important part to this question to me is novice kayak tournament angler here. So Foundation Outdoors is just getting into the tournament thing. And what you said at the beginning was right. Is an important point. If you're finding a school of reds or of other fish that are not in the class that you need, you leave the fish to find the fish. It's not like a regular day fishing where, you always kick yourself for leaving the school. I left the bite to look for a bite. Well, in this case, you better leave the bite to find the other bite if you're not going to get the fish that you want or need for that tournament. So in that respect, I would just say for fishing in a tournament, you have to get a different mindset if you want to fish to win or want to fish to compete. If you're just out there just to have fun with your buddies on the water, which quite frankly, I do quite often for tournaments, I'm not really looking to win necessarily, but just to get out with, when you get 10 kayaks going out at once, just fun. But if you want to win, you have to be willing to pick up that bait and say, wow, look at those beautiful mid-slot reds. But I need an upper slot. So you guys have fun. I'm out. And then you start pedaling across the flat or down a different creek system or something like that. You just have to be willing to do that and willing to accept the consequences or the rewards of that action. I think that's the big part with tournaments. It's a different thing.
Yeah, I'd be curious to know where Foundation Outdoors is because I think I fished a couple redfish tournaments. I know Matt's fished a ton all over Florida, and I'm pretty sure you said you're going to be in Florida's redfish tournament, right? The big championship one.
Yeah, Florida Redfish Series is starting their new kayak series tournament coming up. Their first stop is in Steenhatchee. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd be curious to get your thoughts on this as well. When I've fished tournaments, I've kind of tried to see the region that the tournament is in and learn about the bait migrations and what types of bait are available in that region. Because with really big fish, I find that they don't get big from just eating like normal fish, or, the season that that tournament is in. Where is the bait most prevalent in that region? For example, where I live, in the spring, you get a really big shad hatch that happens. You get all these big shad that show up, and you find a lot of these redfish on the flats near the passes. In the summer, there's a bunch of crabs in the marshes. And as I think of the tournaments, the guys that do really well, a lot of them fish the same, parts of the bay or parts of their region throughout the year. So you see them perform well in different seasons. And it seems like, in my area, those guys that are in the marsh in the summer when the crabs are big, that's the fish that are biggest that time of year. The guys in the spring, they're catching those redfish, those big schools that are after all the shad that are all fat with menhaden oil. In the wintertime, you get these guys that are in the back creeks where redfish are, holed up in those protected areas. It just, I think, depends on what is the bait migrations in your area. Where's bait most prevalent at certain times of year, and picking where the fish are most likely to be big that time of year. You can't just go fish your same holes and expect that you're going to have the biggest fish that time of year there. You need to really take a look at, where is the bait in my bay system? Is there a shrimp flush in the fall that, if I'm fishing the outside of marshes, I'm going to get a bunch of big fish there? Are the mullet really big near the passes and inlet? Do I get a big mullet run in my area in the fall? It really just depends on where the bait is. If you want to get those big tournament fish, I think you need to pick where you're fishing based on where the big fish are going to be. I know that sounds a little bit straightforward, but when I say that, I mean, where is the bait allowing those fish to get big? That's where you need to be fishing. If you can pick some zones in there that those big fish are most likely to be hunting, that's going to be your best bet. So I'm always thinking, when I go to pick spots for a tournament, where is that best availability for those big fish to be feeding going to be? It's not just picking a random spot on a map, because for a whole bay system, it's the 90-10 rule. And I think sticking with that, knowing where that bait's going to be, that's going to be your best opportunity.
Good information. All right, we're at the point now where we have about 8 to 10 minutes left. So what I'm going to start doing is, let's just start throwing some questions in there real quick and just see if we can hit we're not going to get them all, but let's see what we can hit quickly. So I'll put it up in there and read the question. If you want to answer, just put up your hand and jump right in. And we're going to start right here with Nancy Carino. What topwater lure can you use for redfish? And Pat's going to take that one.
Yeah, topwater is kind of my that's my thing. So my favorite is going to be a walking style lure. Now, again, this is going to be seasonal, but if you're talking about all things considered, the most consistent topwater lure for redfish is going to be either our Moonwalker or a Super Spook Junior. Bone color, that's it. Simple.
Any other comments? I'm going to agree with that in my limited experience with it. All right, next one. From Logan's Tackle Box, what is the best lure for snook in the mangroves? Go ahead, Pat.
One of my favorite things to do is skip a big paddle tail under the mangrove. So 5-inch paddle tail, like our bomber, rigged on a weedless hook, skipped underneath the mangroves on, say, a mid tide to a lower tide. That's deadly on snook. Once the tide gets high, the mangroves get so flooded out, the snook can get way back there, and you're not going to be able to get them out. So mid to lower tide, skipping a 5-inch paddle tail, that's the way to go.
All right. That's a good transition into this next one from Marcus Gone Wild. If you had to recommend a type of weedless hook for a paddle tail, what would you use, Wyatt?
I'm going to say an 1/8 ounce Haas Helix hook. I think 1/8 ounce is the best weight you can use for the type of fishing that we all do most, which is just shallow inshore fishing. And that the way that hook's set up is you have a wide enough gap to where you're going to get really good hook sets. The weight's positioned exactly where it needs to be, and that twist hook, like where you can just twist it into a soft plastic, makes for literally the easiest rigging out of any, weedless hook out there. It's just that spring lock is perfect.
All right. I have to show this one. Bull reds in Louisiana, do they bite good in December?
Yes. Yeah, they do. And you're going to find them up in the marshes too, just like the trout. They're going to follow. They're going to be in the same places. Best way to find those is any type that you get that are in between two bigger bodies of water, and the water's flowing in. So the side that the water is flowing to. So you got one big lake on one end, one big lake on another end with a channel. That's where you want to be at those mouths.
Good information. I think this one is for me. Jersey Bull Red question: are they ever found in the bay or just offshore? I've only caught them on a clam with a ball jig just outside the inlet. So redfish in New Jersey, they're kind of like the it's the dream for a lot of people to catch them there, because they do show up, but they are in such small numbers and they're so hard to find that it's extremely rare to get any, especially bull size. John, I will tell you that I have spoken to a couple of people directly that have caught what would be considered bull redfish in New Jersey in the bays in the past year. So they are back there. But these people that also target them have not caught more than just a couple a year. So yes, they're back there, and we'll hit the water together and we'll go looking for them, because I'm on that mission to figure them out. So yes, they're there in the backs. However, with that said, your best shot is going to be catching them off the beach and in the inlets, especially some of these southern inlets that are lined with rock walls. All right. And next one that I have listed here. Oh, I wonder if this is okay. From Tom Kirby. We're talking a lot about striper lately. Would these stripers be the same as the stripers on the West Coast? Are they the same? Would you target them the same way? So, Tom, I'll say this. There are probably differences in them. I mean, even if you just look at the East Coast striped bass population, they are different gene pools. So you have the Hudson stripers, you have the Chesapeake stripers. So they're going to be different. However, they're going to perform out on the water and act in a very, very similar fashion. So, they're going to migrate the same way. They're going to be found in the same types of structures. I've talked to a couple of guys that actually have been fishing them in California lately and have been doing a really good job with them. And they're catching them the same way that we're catching them in the mid-Atlantic. So they're looking for, for the migrating bass. They're looking for the large bait fish. They're looking for those schools. They're looking for the blitzes. And they're doing the same exact thing as we are. Either big, huge, soft plastic baits in the 6 to 9 inch range, or they're using adult bunker, or not adult bunker, whatever the bait fish is that they're chasing, they're snagging or netting, and they're using those on a circle hook. So maybe it's bunker. I don't know what it is out there, to be honest with you, but they are behaving the same way. They're very similar, but there are going to be some genetic differences between them. I'm not an expert on that, so I can't go into too much detail. We have interesting gear question here. How many pound braid should I add on my Shimano Stratic 4000? Wyatt?
I think 4000's for inshore fishing. It's a little large. If you're using it for inshore fishing, trying to cast a bunch, I do 10 pound braid. But being that's a 4000, you're probably fishing around some big structure, bridges, jetties, maybe. I'd pop on some maybe 30 pound braid. When I fish around structure, I go about there. That'd be my recommendation.
I agree. Leader?
Again, depends on whether you're fishing inshore or if you're fishing around that structure. For inshore, I'll probably put on 20, 25. You really need the 25 for bull reds, 20, 25 for reds. And if you're just fishing for trout, you can go 15 to 20. I think those are the two sizes I'd go. Structure-wise, if you're fishing around those big jetties, I go up to sometimes 60 pound leader so that those bull reds don't, cut me off of the rocks. I have that issue over here at the Port Aransas jetties. If you're fishing around docks, maybe 30, 40 pound leader. You don't need to go up too high, but if there's snook or something big around that's going to wrap you on a pylon, you don't want to get popped off.
Good point. What are the best tricks to catch fish at a dock?
I'll take it again. I think just being really subtle with your presentations. If there's dock lights, try to fish directly under the docks. If you're using lures, white lures seem to work really good. If you're using live bait, downsize everything from your hook to your leader. Just try to keep it as subtle as possible, because there's a very good chance those fish are smart. If they're hanging around docks, they've probably been thrown on And you need to be as subtle as you can. I think night fishing is probably the best way to catch fish around docks. It's when you have the least chance of them knowing that you're there. And if you're fishing around those lights, they're trained to feed at those lights, basically.
Yeah. I'm going to add, because I love night fishing for striped bass at docks. That's my favorite place to do it. Just jump in the kayak, just start going around the docks. It's fun because you can see them in the lights, but there are different ways to fish them. So one thing or a couple of things to keep in mind. First of all, you don't have to fish in the light to fish the dock. Often what I'll do is I'll skip up under the dock, and I'm going to look for getting into the dark. So get on the other side of that shadow line into the dark, and then work it towards the light. You don't even have to go actually through the light, but you want to know where the shadow line is, where the light hits the bottom of the body of water that you're fishing, right? So if it's hitting up here and it's 8 feet deep, it's at a 45-degree angle. Well, it's probably 16 feet away. You have to get out there towards the darker stuff. That's where you're going to find, typically for striped bass, the bigger fish. They're not the ones crashing the bait in the light. They're the ones cruising the outside in the dark, picking up everything that's on the bottom. So I would say that's a big tip. The other thing is, when you're fishing at night in docks, especially if there are lights, you don't have to go with the dark colors. A lot of people say, well, if it's dark out, you use dark. If it's cloudy, you use the darker things. If it's bright out, you use the brighter baits like the whites and the pinks. When you're fishing at night and there's lights, feel free to use the pinks and the whites. Feel free to you can still use the darks too. Use whatever you want and just hit those shadow lines, but still be very careful and very aware of the fact that if you're fishing from the dock and you get in front of that light, they can see you. So, stay behind the light and work it that way. Any other tips on dock fishing from anyone?
I would just add that redfish are the exact same way as the stripers. The bigger fish are typically on the outer edges, whereas it's the smaller fish that are crashing the bait. So I love using, I don't use anything that makes a lot of noise. Typically a small shrimp and just bounce along the bottom, and you'd be surprised. You don't have to have a high vis or a high vibration lure. These fish are keen to be able to find this bait in the dark. So just a natural presentation is all you need.
I agree. All right, so I'm going to go around one more time because I think we got through all of the questions that are realistic to get through right now. Do you have any parting thoughts that you want to give to anybody before we call this a stream? Let's start with you, Pat.
Yeah, I mean, right now, I think what's important I'm seeing a lot of posts in the community about having issues with finding fish. This transition period it can be tough. Where you were finding them even a week or two ago is going to be different from where you're finding them now. So just pay attention to those trends. And as that water temperature drops, start moving towards those wintertime haunts. So they were moving closer to the creek mouths, and now they might be moving into those creeks now. So make sure and keep on moving until that weather really stabilizes and you get those standard fronts that are coming in through every week. But right now it's a time of transition, and don't get discouraged. They're going to move.
Great. Wyatt?
I'd say we've talked about a lot of different types of structure, a lot of different types of bait. And even as everyone's kind of talked about their areas, there are a lot of regional differences. And it's really important to know what's happening in your area and how to find all the different types of structure we talked about. And I see Florida Bearded Woodworker says, tell us about the app, please. Yeah. I think perfect segue into that. If you guys want to be able to find fish really fast and find the types of structure, like literally know exactly how to see an oyster bar, that Smart Fishing Spots app actually has like an oyster bar finding feature or a seagrass finding feature where it highlights that stuff on a satellite map. And if you want to keep up with what's going on in your area, we've got guides and coaches like Pat and Matt, myself, Rich, that make a weekend game plan every single week, talking about the trends for areas. We highlight different types of spots that could be good to go to. We have local guides that come on and actually call in and give reports about what's happening, what they're seeing as they take clients out every day on the water. So I'd highly encourage you guys to get in and check out those weekend game plans. Use the Smart Fishing app to really locate a lot of the areas that we've talked about for winter fishing. If you're looking to have some more success out on the water, just get in there and try to utilize all the different tools that you can that we provide through Salt Strong. And if you guys have questions on that, obviously leave it in the comments. More than happy to link anything there. We've got a lot of tutorials on it, but just pay attention to what's happening in your area with different types of bait, different types of structure that's been hot, because it changes a lot during winter. So definitely stay in tune with your regional trends, and that's how you're going to stay on fish.
Sounds good. Matt?
Yeah, I'd say just kind of piggyback on what both of the other guys said. Right now this transition can be super tough. The fish are moving, just like Pat said, they're not where they were a week ago or even 2 days ago. If a front comes through, so you definitely got to look for where the fish are going to be moving according to the trend. If it's a warming front, they may be pulling out. If it's a cooling front or a cooling trend, excuse me, they may be pushing deeper or further in towards, those backwater areas. They're going to be looking for warmth. And when they're looking for warmth, at least for us in the Panhandle Big Bend, that means darker water. Darker water means warmer water. And, they're going to be looking for structure like oyster bottom, and, redfish will be looking for that oyster bottom and mud flats where they're going to be at. And redfish will be pushing into those backwater areas where, you can get some drop offs in those creeks and stuff where, they can retreat to those deeper waters and fatten up. Because just like Wyatt talked about, these fish know about these, the changes that are happening right now. And they know these colder temperatures are coming. So they're trying to, get as many calories as they can while there's a lot of bait right now, because as soon as we start getting these really cold temperatures and these warmer days die off, all of this bait is gone. So these fish are going to start, getting into this really hungry period. And so right now, when you find these fish, you can really capitalize on it with while they're eating good right now.
Good tips. I'm just going to finish up with, look, the weather in the mid-Atlantic and the Northeast is getting cold, and that is awesome, because every time we get a cold snap and you get this, 20 to 30 degree weather for a couple of days, it kicks off the bite. So the striped bass just start going crazy. The bunkers start moving again. The west winds are going to bring that bunker in closer. So look for the west winds. And when you have the west winds, the bunker are into the wind, they're heading towards the coast. And that's where you get these big striped bass following them. Now, keep in mind, if you want to go with artificials and you're going for these larger bass, if they're on adult bunker, you need something big like the Tsunami 9-inch holographic shads. If they're on the peanut bunkers, you need something like an Algag's 6-inch, which is a much slimmer profile, but you're still going to have to match the hatch. But if you really want to get on them and you have the adult bunker coming through, snag an adult bunker, put it on a circle hook, throw it over, and start popping that. Nothing is going to beat live bait when it's an adult bunker feed. And if you can get one of those biggest, of the biggest ones, the 10, 12, 14 inchers, and put that on a circle, do it. It's not too big. You're going to end up with those 40, 50-inch fish, and it's just going to make your day. So with that said, we're going to wrap it up here. I want to tell everybody watching the live stream and watching the replay in advance of Thanksgiving, have a great Thanksgiving. Hopefully you can get out on the water. And if not, hey, we've got some videos that'll keep you entertained. If you're an insider member, jump in the community and just share in the pictures that are about to flood through there with all the Thanksgiving reports, and just kind of live vicariously through your brothers and sisters in there, which is what I plan on doing, because I don't think I'm going to be hitting the water in the next couple of days. So with that said, everybody, thank you to the coaches. Thank you for tuning in. Thanks for watching the replay. Leave your comments below if you have any questions. Till next week, until next episode, get out there, get on the water,